بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So last time we left off the hadith يعني أفضل الأعمال أو العمل الصلاة لوقتها وبر الوالدين كده okay. And what did we say about this hadith? Praying on time, praying early. What does praying early mean?
Praying its window before the time.
Right, praying within its window before what? Right, but before it gets, so we said that when we organized the prayer time, we said that there was basically two time frames, right? There's waqt muwassa and waqt mudiq, right? So you said that there's a time that's it's basically a relaxed time to pray, and then there's a tighter time to pray. In that relaxed time, that is the best time to pray. And what does relaxed mean? It means that I'm praying without worrying about the next prayer actually coming in. And waqt al-mudiq, this is when I'm worried about the next prayer time actually starting. And this time it is, what is the hukm on this time to pray? It's disliked, it's makruh. It's makruh to pray in that time period. When does it become haram? Right, when the next prayer starts. Right, when the next prayer starts. That's when a person actually bears sin at that time. But as long as I'm praying within that window, then my prayer is sound, and there it is rewarded. And we had said, like, okay, many times we talk about praying early. What is the problem in how do I define early? It's subjective, right? It's difficult to say what is early. Like, is it 15 minutes after adhan? Is it an hour after adhan? Is it 2 hours after adhan? Right? And it becomes very subjective to define it in that way, versus defining in a way it's like, okay, as long as I'm praying within that prayer time, that it is comfortable for me to pray completely, and Allah knows best. We talked about bir, and we said Imam Nawawi, he described bir how? How do we usually translate bir? Right, they usually translate it as obedience, but that's not the translation that's correct. That's not even where the term comes from. Bir, Imam Nawawi, he says al-ihsan ilayhim, right? To be good to your parents, to be kind, to be respectful. This is what matters. We'll talk about uquq walidain today, inshallah, if we get to the hadith, and he talks a little bit more about obedience concerning that. But basically, what Imam Muslim is doing now with all of these hadith, he's actually categorizing them between those sins that are considered major sins, those things that are considered most important, and he's starting to go down the list and kind of collect all of those hadith, and that's the relationship with them here. فقال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى قال حدثنا عثمان بن أبي شيبة وإسحاق بن إبراهيم قال إسحاق أخبرنا جرير وقال عثمان حدثنا جرير بن منصور عن أبي وائل عن عمرو بن شرحبيل عن عبد الله قال سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أي ذنب أعظم عند الله. So over here you have Abdullah, most likely Ibn Umar, he's asking the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, what is the greatest sin? قال أن تجعل الله ندا وهو خلقك. He says, and to make an equal with Allah, even though He is the one that created you. Yeah. And then he goes on to say, قلت له إن ذلك لعظيم. He said this is something great, right? This is something that is major. قال قلت ثم أي, and then he said, then what? And he said, ثم أن تقتل ولدك مخافة أن يطعم معك. So over here is to kill your child out of fear that he will eat with you. So, and over here Imam Nawawi, he goes into different explanations of what that actually means, and we'll talk about that inshallah. قلت ثم أي, and he said, then what? قال ثم أن تزاني حليلة جارك. He says, and to make zina with your neighbor's wife. And we'll talk individually about why he sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually pointed these out. And then the next hadith he brings is actually very similar to this hadith, where he says, قال حدثنا عثمان بن أبي شيبة وإسحاق بن إبراهيم جميعا عن جرير قال عثمان قال حدثنا جرير عن الأعمش عن أبي وائل عن عمرو بن شرحبيل قال عبد الله قال رجل. So a man said, يا رسول الله, O Messenger of Allah, أي ذنب أكبر عند الله. He said, what is the greatest sin or the biggest sin to Allah? قال أن تدعو لله ندا وهو خلقك. He says, and to call upon Allah a equal, right? To call upon an equal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ خَلَقَكَ, and He is the one that created you. قال ثم أي, he said, then what? قال أن تقتل ولدك مخافة أن يطعم معك, to kill your child out of fear that he will eat with you. قال ثم أي, he said, then what? قال أن تزاني حليلة جارك, he said, and to make zina with your neighbor's wife. فأنزل الله عز وجل تصديقها. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He revealed the verse in agreement with this, saying وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. And those individuals who make dua to other than Allah, to a deity other than Him, وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. And not to kill another except with due right, وَلَا يَزْنُونَ, and not to make zina, وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ يَلْقَى أَثَامًا. And whoever does that will be a great sinner. So over here, he says, مَخَافْةَ أَنْ يَطْعَمَ مَعَكَ is like out of fear of eating with you. And he says this is similar to what the verse that was mentioned in the end. And what is the intention here? When he says that you fear that this child is going to eat with you.
Not be able to, have enough money to.
Oh, good. Poverty. Like, so you actually fear poverty. You fear being poor because of this child. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about imlaq, that's exactly what that is, right? It's killing this child out of fear of poverty. And then He says, okay, so and then He gives the explanation. Yalqa athama is like, to be sinful. He says that if an individual does this, they will be sinful. He will be punished. Another one that this will be the punishment and the consequences of what that individual does. It is also said yalqa athama. Athama is also one of. It's said that it's one of the valleys of the hellfire. So there are different explanations of what the verse means and what that entails. But the fact that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is saying this, what is that telling us? Do you think that this is something that was practiced? Right? It's yeah. So killing children, I don't know if it was a regular practice, right? I can't say that it was something that all of them did, but they did kill their daughters, and that's something that we can talk about. And over here, the fact that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is actually pointing this out, it means like this is something that was actually practiced, and people actually feared this. That what would happen is that if they had a child, they would kill that child out of fear of poverty. And what kind of people were they? Like, so these people who were doing this, what status in society do you think they had? Or they were low, right? This is not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not talking to who?
Elite.
He's not talking to the elite, right? He's not talking to the rich here. He's not talking to the elite. Why? They don't have to worry about it. Like, these aren't things that they actually have to worry about. These are things that poor people have to worry about. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling them, like, okay, listen, you can't do this. This is evil. This is wrong. But by telling them they can't do this, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is He actually telling them? And what is He saying to them?
It's like I'm the provider.
He's like, I'm the one that provides them. Like, I'm the one that provides. I'm the one that takes care. This is not something that you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about this. I will take care of the rizq. So, and that's why it's such a great sin. That's why it's such a great sin, because you are trying to take a matter into your hands which has nothing to do with you, right? And this is none of your business. And then He sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, and tuzani halil tijarak, and to make zina with your neighbor's wife. Firstly, zina. What is zina?
Engaging in illicit action for someone who's not permissible.
Right. So being intimate with someone who is not permissible to be intimate with, like, or somebody, especially somebody who is married. And the other layer to this, and I actually found this very interesting, how Imam Nawawi he presents this, that the problem with zina is that it's actually an agreement by both parties. That zina is consensual.
It's not right.
Huh? And over here, he's basically saying that the Prophet ﷺ is not talking about what?
Right.
He's not talking about rape. Why is this worse? Why would the Prophet ﷺ, why would he mention this?
Zina is worse than everything.
So over here, yes. In this situation, it's okay, why? Like rape is bad, right? There's no doubt about that. Like, but why is zina worse? Why would the Prophet ﷺ mention this?
Specifically with the neighbor, or just in general?
So both, and I think talking about both is something that's really important. Like no one doubts that that rape is bad, right? There's nobody saying, oh, rape is good, right? Rape is definitely a problem. It's definitely an issue, and it's something that's haram. But what is it that makes zina worse? And it's not necessarily in a physical sense, right? That's not what we're talking about. Sometimes we confuse criminality and physicality, but in a spiritual sense, one is worse than the other. Why? Well, sure, but with zina, like we said, it's what? It's consensual. So how many people do you have sinning here? You have two people sitting here. And in the case of rape, it's one, right? And are there extra sins that are associated with that, right? There's the abuse, whether it be physical or mental. You know what I mean? Like, there are layers to rape. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, the sin is falling on one individual, right? It's falling on one person. It's not falling on both. And the problem with zina is that the sin is falling on both. And not just that. How does zina happen? You just walk into somebody's house and khalas? No. Huh? Okay, well, society definitely has a role, right? There's no doubt, like maybe they do takhfif of it, right? They make it, so it's not a big deal. But I think those are smaller factors. What is the way, like how do people actually fall into zina? Like, you have to plan it, right? It's something that and not just that, even before the planning, what else is going on? Or like even during the planning stages, that these two people are what? I'm sorry? Oh, there's some isolation that's happening. What else is happening? They're interacting, right? They're interacting and they're dealing with each other. But in addition to that, as the neighbors that we have, do we deal with our neighbors or no? Right? And what is the advantage of a neighbor? Like, neighbors in general are people we what? We trust them, right? So, ideally, right? I mean, alhamdulillah, in general, I think it still happens, it still exists. Like, neighbors tend to look out for each other, or it's like, hey, I saw somebody at your house, like, the other day, like, or I heard a noise, is everything okay? This is something that generally happens with neighbors. Neighbors, they usually get together to have like a neighborhood watch, right? To keep an eye on the neighborhood, making sure that each other is safe. So what has happened here now? In this situation, the expectations we have from the neighbor, what happened? I'm sorry? Destruction. Okay, it's destruction of what? The trust. Right, it's a breakdown of the trust. And we had mentioned this before, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about zina, and when he talked about theft, and when he talked about alcohol, like drinking alcohol, like the societal harms that these things cause. But with zina specifically, and especially with a neighbor, the problem is you have a breakdown in trust. And when you have a breakdown of trust, like, this is where communities start falling apart. Because essentially, community is built on this idea, right? It's built on this idea of trust. And now you have one of the most, because sometimes what we rely on for our neighbors is many times more than what we rely on family. And I'm sure many of us can think, like, everybody has different dynamics with their neighbors, but if I just give my example, like one of my neighbors, my kids go over his house, and like his kids come over my house, and they play with each other. If we run out of salt or something, we ask them, and they ask for fruits, and it's very common, right? It's very common, for that to happen. During Eid, people exchange like meat, and all of these things happen within the neighborhood. And all of a sudden, a person does this. It hits so much closer to home. It hits so much closer to home, and it's interesting how the Prophet ﷺ is really highlighting some of these relationships and how important they are, and how important trust is, and how that is something that needs to be and must be maintained. We skipped the first part of the hadith, right? أن تجعل لله ندا وهو خلقك. Right? So hands down, the greatest sin and the worst sin is shirk. Right? Is shirk. And how is it described here? To call upon what? أن تجعل الله ندا. Right? To call upon an equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that if I call upon someone lesser, is that shirk?
Somebody less of the thinking that they're equal, that is shirk.
So he's not equal at that point, right? So there are a couple things that can happen here. Either, so what is the paradigm of a pagan? So like a mushrik. What is their paradigm and what is that they're thinking? Either they have all of these gods, and all of these gods they're what? They're equal, right? Either they're equal in power, or you believe what? Right, one is higher than the other. So there's like a hierarchy of gods. But even in that hierarchy of gods, can this lesser god have an effect on the main god?
Yeah.
Yes, they can, right? There can be influence or there can be something else. So these are the two general ways on how shirk is viewed and how shirk is formed. But if I ask Uthman for a pen, this is shirk, right? Why? I'm calling upon him. I have to ask Allah for a pen.
He executes the will of Allah.
Allahu Akbar. All right.
Yeah.
But no. But I'm saying by him executing the will of Allah, I've now made him dependent, right? So still, this idea of independence is not there. I'm not ascribing that to Uthman. I can ask him for a pen, and he gives it. What if I ask him for something he can't do? I say, Uthman, I want a roast beef sandwich. Can you give me a roast beef sandwich right now? No. So I'm asking him for something he can't do with mayonnaise. So. With some Miracle Whip. Huh? So the Miracle Whip makes it shirk. Because it's a miracle. So if I'm asking him for something he can't do, is that shirk? No. You could say it's silly. You can say it's ridiculous. Like why would you ask him for something that he can't do? But it's still not shirk. And this is the paradigm that's important to keep in mind. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about making equals with him, right? These are people who actually we believe are equals to him. But the moment I say that someone is dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm asking them, then this is no longer shirk. No. طيب قال حدثنا عمرو بن محمد. نعم تفضل. Yeah. So this is even this verse, right? ولا تدعون مع الله إلها, right? So don't call upon another deity.
By asking for the roast beef, you're not killing it.
I mean, do I believe he has the power to create roast beef independent of
He didn't create
Allah?
He didn't create the cow.
No, even if he didn't, is that he can make these things appear independent of Allah. He doesn't rely upon Allah for those things. And and that's important. Like if I ask you guys, hey, I need help picking up these chairs after class.
They exist.
Right? No, I'm saying, so the question isn't about like, okay, asking about what they can and can't do, right? That's not the issue here. The issue is those objects or people that I'm asking, are they independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? Right? And we don't believe that they are. So even these verses are very clear. Like, if you are not equating them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would not be shirk.
Somebody object and say, look, you making dua
Yeah.
to somebody, for example.
Abdul Qadir, right? Sidi Abdul Qadir.
Yes.
It's very common.
Yes.
No.
So isn't that shirk?
So okay, what do they believe about Sidi Abdul Qadir?
He's maybe a wali of Allah.
They believe he's a wali. So there are two reasons people usually will ask those individuals, right? One of those reasons is they believe what? He is, right? He's closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's blessing in that. Or they believe what? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted them some ability. And that's the question. Again, it boils down to the same thing. I'm asking someone for something they can't do. Ridiculous. You can say it's silly. Like, why would you do it like this? But at the end of the day, can you say it is shirk? Yeah. No. And it's the same, like I said, I know a pen or asking someone for a ride or to clean up chairs is a lesser example, but it's the same thing. If I believe a person has that ability or has that power, you can say, well, that's silly. Why would you believe that? Right? That's ridiculous. But it's not an issue of shirk and tawheed and ibadah. قال حدثنا عمرو بن محمد بن بكير ابن محمد الناقد قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن عليا عن سعيد الجريري قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن أبي بكر عن أبيه قال كنا عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ألا أنبئكم بأكبر الكبائر ثلاث. So over here you have the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, shall I not warn you of the greatest of sins? Shall I not warn you of the greatest of sins? And he said this 3 times. Al-Ishrak billah, right? To make shirk or to share partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa uquq al-walidain. Wa uquq al-walidain. And this can be being disrespectful to your parents. Wa shahadat zur, and bearing false testimony. Aw qawl zur, or making a false statement or false claim. وَكَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, and the Messenger of Allah was, he was resting, and when he said it, he got up. فَمَا زَالَ يُكَرِّرُهَا حَتَّى قُلْنَا لَيْتَهُ سَكَتَ. And he kept repeating this, right? He kept repeating these 3 sins, and the way he was saying it, the companions were like, they wanted him to what? They wanted him to stop. Why? Why did they want him to stop? So, Wallahu alam, I think he kept repeating it. I think they wanted him to stop because they were scared. Right? Like he kept impressing it upon them, and they started getting, they started getting worried and they started getting scared, and they're like, he keeps saying it. I wish he would stop. Right? Because of the intimidation that comes when you have somebody constantly repeating that thing to you. So over here he says that, okay, what is the, shall I not tell you of the greatest sins? And he said this 3 times. He said making shirk with Allah, disrespecting your parents, and taking false testimony. So here you have a list of major sins. And the issue with the list of all of these major sins is that you have different ahadith that actually list different sins. Some of them, they say, al-kaba'ir thalath, that the major sins are 3, or arba, they're 4, or some of them even say they're 7. And you have all of these different numbers. Why do you think that is?
Because it might be different from how you categorize them.
Right, there's different categories. There are different, so for example, the greatest sins when dealing with others. Right, that's a possibility. Or the greatest sins in regards to Allah's rights. Right, or the greatest sins, so categorization is a definite possibility. Or the greatest sins may be based on the person in front of him. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam is telling them, because possibly some of the things that either they fall into or they're known to be in their family, or the greatest sins because this is something that is done and it's something that people are taking very lightly. The other question then comes is like, okay, well, what is a kabira? What is a major sin? Which is actually a very valid question. That what does it mean to be a kabira? And there's like a whole list of definitions, and we'll go through some of them inshallah. But let's go through this hadith first and some of the meanings that I think are relevant and that are important. So, shirk billah we already explained and we spoke about. Uquq al-walidain, right, being disrespectful to your parents. So this is very different than the previous hadith, right? Uquq al-walidain, and being disrespectful. He says that there are ways to show what disrespect actually means. And he's saying that it's basically disobedience in those things that are easy to fulfill. So if, for example, my father asks me for a pen and I say no, he says that this would be uquq. Why? So he says, what's interesting, he says like hayyin. He's like, these things that are easy to do and easy to fulfill. My parents are like, take out the trash. And I say no, right?
Were you able to say that?
Alhamdulillah, I was. So like there, I can't make the sandwich though. So like there, you have these things that is very easy for us to fulfill. And the moment I say no for those things, that is where the accountability comes. And this is where he said this is what uquq is. Because is complete obedience to them expected?
And that's where the problem is, like, some of the parents want to dictate, that you're going to be at this school, with this major, you're going to live with this guy, you're going to marry this girl.
Sure. So those dictations, the question is like, is that they're allowed to request, no doubt, right? There's an agreement on that. My parents are allowed; they are allowed to ask from me anything that is halal. They have every right to that. Am I obligated to fulfill every single one of those requests? It depends.
It's related to them and you can do whatever.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, right? If it has something to do with that specifically with them, and it's something that's easy to fulfill, right? If they're asking me for something that I just cannot do, well, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking me for something that I can't do, how is it fair that a parent asks for that or a parent requests that? Right? So that's something that's very important to keep in mind. Yeah.
For example, though, it tells me to bring me the pen, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you, let me finish reading this and
Yeah.
So that's cool.
I didn't disobey him. I delayed it with a reason, right?
I'm playing again.
Yeah.
Let me finish this episode.
Yeah. And so how do you determine that? It really depends. Number one, is that something you can walk away from? What is it something that's urgent that he needs? Like, he's waiting at the door and the guy wants a signature for a package and he's like, hey, give me a pen. You're like, okay, yeah, let me finish my game. How long is your game going to take? It's going to take a half hour.
Sometimes you
Right.
can't stop.
That's it.
You're playing online with 10 other people. They all have to stop.
Well, or you die, right? Or you die, or you lose a position, or whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, it's like, all right, even in that situation, is playing the game an emergency? No. Right?
It's a fun thing.
Right? It's a fun thing. So these things, it's always going to. It definitely is subjective. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, it's like if it's easy for me to fulfill, then there's no reason for me not to do that. Right? There's no reason for me not to do that. Some other hadith that talk about the kaba'ir. You have a hadith Abu Hurairah, where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ijtanibu as-sab' al-mubiqat." So it was asked to the Messenger of Allah, what are they? He said, "Ashirk billah." So he says, number one is shirk. He said, number two, sihr, right, magic. And he says, three, وَقَتَلِ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. And he says, and to murder someone or to kill someone except without due right. وَأَكْلِ مَالِ الْيَتِيمِ. And to eat the wealth of the orphan. وَأَكْلِ riba. And to consume riba. وَتَوَلِّي يَوْمَ الزُّحْفِ. And over here is like, yeah, it's basically, it has to do with like shahada zur. It has to do with shahada zur, from what I remember. And he says, وَقَذْفَ الْمُحْسَنَاتِ الْغَافِلَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. So it's accusing women who are upright and women who are pure of zina. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu, he says that the Messenger of Allah, he says that the major sins are to curse your parents. To curse your parents. And قالوا يا رسول الله وهل يشتم الرجل والديه? He says, how's it possible? Like, how can a person curse their parents? And he says, yes, it is possible. يسب أبا الرجل فيسب أباه ويسب أمه فيسب أمه. So he says that he curses his father, and how does he respond? By cursing your father. You curse his mother, and he responds by cursing your mother.
So that's my fault.
Yes, it is. Because the response in those situations is well known. The response is well known. If I know that, so this has to do with instigating, right? This very much has to do with instigating.
So let's say I curse you and you curse my parents. Is that
Yeah.
I curse my parents?
Yes, it's like here over here. It's not you directly doing it,
Yeah.
but you're the one who's indirect. You're the one who directly initiated it. So are you held accountable for that? So there's accountability on both sides. There's no doubt, but the majority of the accountability falls on the one who initiated it. All right. So if somebody initiates it, it's like poking someone, right? Poking someone is jaiz, right? It's fine. I'm allowed to poke people, like if I want their attention. I keep doing it, and he's like, stop. And I keep doing it. I keep poking him. And he turns around and then he hits me. Was Was it fair that, like, is he allowed to hit me? No, he's not allowed to hit me, right? That's not right. But who is ultimately responsible for the situation?
Who triggered it all?
Yeah, I am, the one who instigated. So over here, this is, like, the Prophet ﷺ is actually making a very important point just around and regarding instigation. Like, it's not permissible to instigate people when you know exactly what their reaction is going to be. That's not a fair way of dealing with others, knowing how they're going to respond. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses an example of this. He says, لا تسب الذين يدعون من دون الله. He says, don't curse their deities. Don't curse them. Why? Right? Because they're going to curse Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that. Is that يسبون الله بغير علم. It's like that. So how do they respond? They respond by cursing Allah. And again, who's the one that is mainly held responsible for the one who instigated? So if I know that a person is going to respond in a certain way, then I have no right to instigate him. And it's not beneficial, right? Because by instigating someone else, the next time I engage with them, what are they going to remember? Right? The fact, yeah, the last encounter, and I haven't helped that relationship or even opened their mind. Like, they might dislike me, and that's fine. Not everybody is going to be liked. But I should not create situations where it'll stop people from listening to me and where it'll stop people from engaging with me. So the first hadith that we had mentioned from these list of hadith that talk about the 7 sins, the Prophet ﷺ, he doesn't call it the kaba'ir, he calls it mubiqat. So mubiqat is basically, it's those things that are destructive. So the word mubiqat, it actually says, it means those things that actually destroy. And then he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he mentions in the same hadith, and to accuse the muhsan, right? To accuse the muhsan is like to accuse of a woman who is chaste. And he says, an ihsan is 5 things. So a woman is to protect 5 things. A woman is to protect 5 things. Al-iffa, her chastity. Al-Islam, her religion. Al-nikah, her marriage. التزويج والحرية. So شو الفرق?
تزويج?
Yeah.
She's marrying off somebody else.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What does that mean?
Maybe Hakid's marriage.
ممكن, maybe.
To instigate to.
Yeah, maybe like other marriages in her family. I'll ask about it because I don't understand what the difference is here.
And then Hurriya?
Yeah, hurriya, like the fact that she should not put herself in situations where she could become a slave, right? And that's less of an issue now, right, than it wasn't. But the problem, so this issue, like even this last one, is if a family, for example, falls into hard times, or if they're not able to pay someone back, what is an option? What happens is that sometimes, as an option, a woman will what? She'll present herself to take care of a debt or to release her husband, right? It's an unfortunate reality that happens. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that, no, you are obligated to what? Maintain your chastity. Maintain your honor. Don't fall into the tricks of the shaitan. Don't believe that this is an actual way out. This is not a way out. These things have to be preserved, and these are the ways to do it. The other hadith that we said, the kaba'ir saba, and from them we said was sihr, from them was magic. So what's interesting here is that Imam Nawawi, he says there's khilaf on this. He says the khilaf is not on performing magic. Everybody agrees on this. Everybody agrees that it is not permissible to perform magic. But he says that some of his companions, they say that it's permissible to learn about magic so that you can what? So you can avoid it. And so you can protect yourself from it. Yeah, and warn others about it. Because if an individual learns about magic, they'll see things that other people don't see. So if I have zero familiarity with magic, I might look at some signs, or I might look at some spices, or I might look at some things, or I might find some hair or something, you know what I mean? I'll have no idea, right? But if someone else who's versed or learned in these things, he'll see those things and he'll say what? He's like somebody's practicing magic. There's something that's going on.
There's a picture one of them?
I'm sorry?
Could a picture be a sign?
I mean, I'm not super versed. Maybe. I don't see.
Because,
Yeah.
back home,
Maybe they try kids.
Mm.
it does a picture.
Oh, that's what I mean. He says قال بعض أصحابنا.
But who himself he says is up
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me. I think it's important to be aware and versed. Like, I don't think you need a lot of detail, and I can see why somebody would say it's haram, because it's very, when you start learning some of those things, it becomes a very slippery slope, right? So I can see the danger of falling into that and doing that. So kabira, what is the kabira? So you have different explanations. So if that's a clear one, if the Prophet ﷺ says this is a kabira, khalas, it's a kabira. So there are some that some of the scholars have done through ijtihad and said, okay, well these are also kaba'ir.
punishment associated with
Yeah, so these are some of them. So the first one he brings,
Anything that has had.
So anything that has a had in it, anything that there's a la'an in it. So like these are all different things that they say are kaba'ir. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, he says, Al-kaba'ir kullu dhanbin khatamahu Allahu ta'ala binar, aw ghadab, aw la'na, aw adhab. So Ibn Abbas, he says that a kabira is any sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala follows with a promise of the hellfire, with anger, with a curse, or a punishment. So he says like any sin that is followed by one of these things, then automatically that sin is a kabira, right? It's a major sin. And then you have others who say that anything that brings أن كل معصية يقدم المرء عليه من غير اشتغال خوف وحضار ندم. Okay, now this is Ghazali is talking about what happens when somebody has commits a minor sin. كل ذنب كبر وعظم عظما يصح معه أن يطلق عليه اسم الكبير. So over here, Ibn Salah, he puts a general definition saying that any major sin, or any sin that is great, it can be considered a kabira. But what Imam Nawawi also mentions is that he mentions he quotes Izz ibn Abdul Salam, and he says that there's a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left this concept like mubham. And he says the reason for that is because when you leave some elements of things undefined, what happens? Not khilaf. Right? If you have something that's unclear, you're going to make extra effort to what? To stay away from it. Right? So and he even says that within these sins there's a spectrum. Right? Within these sins is a spectrum. And I think one of the examples that he shares is like stealing money from a rich person versus stealing money from a poor person. Both of these are stealing, right? Both of these are haram, both of these are major sins. He said, but which one is worse? Right, stealing from the poor person. He said, or taking a date from the marketplace, stealing a date from the marketplace, or stealing a date from an orphan. Right? One is clearly worse. Lying to a stranger or lying to your parents. Lying to a person where will end up them getting killed, versus lying to someone so that you can get something from them. He said all of these have a spectrum. All of these have a spectrum. And he said, and this is something that's important to always keep in mind. The other issue that they bring up is, all right, well, can small sins become kaba'ir? So can a minor sin become a major sin? And some scholars, they argue yes, if a person continues doing it, or like he's persistent upon it. But I don't know, man.
Unless it's mixed with
how could you make something of less part?
Yeah, that's
It would be tough.
and that's the issue I have. It's like I can understand why somebody would say that, right?
Try to warn
To warn people like, hey, just because this is a minor sin, don't what? Don't take it easy. Don't take it easy, because it could become a major sin. But the problem is when you do that, you're actually making something, you're trying to put something there that doesn't exist. and this is part of the issue that I have with it. These things they're pretty tawqifi, right? They're pretty tawqifi in the sense that I know something is a major sin because Allah or his Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said that this is a major sin. Me interjecting and saying that, okay, no, this is that, I think it's very problematic. I think it's very difficult.
What if it mixes with maybe that's the only situation where if it has Saghira mixes with Kabira.
But
Same
it,
situation.
but the thing is, even then, why would they? What's going to be the difference? Like here, for example, a person is going to steal. His walking on the way is haram, right? But the walking is not a major sin. The actual theft is the major sin, right? So this is one. I still see them to be separate. And the fact that an individual, like one of the things that they were actually saying is that, okay, well you lose that sense of remorse, right? You lose that sense of remorse, but that loss of remorse is more of a sign of my what? It's more of a sign of my iman, and that is something that helps us personally gauge, right? So if I'm falling into sin and then I don't feel anything about that sin, what should I do? No, I have to reflect, right? I have to reflect that now this sin is just it's not having an effect on me. And if it's not having an effect on me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is no longer giving me tawfiq, right? He's no longer blessing me. I have a lot of people come to see me and they're like, Shaykh, I did this or I did X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, how do you feel about that? I feel upset. And I said, then be happy that you feel upset. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still giving you tawfiq. Is this always this loud? So this idea of uquq, قال أبو محمد بن عبد السلام, and this is Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, he's known as Sultan al-Ulama. He says, لم أقف في عقوق والدين وفيما يختصان به من الحقوق على ضابط أعتمده. So he says that I haven't come across anything that really clarifies on what that actually means and what that entails. فإنه لا يجب طاعتهما في كل ما يأمران به وينهيان عنه باتفاق العلماء. So he's saying that complete obedience to parents is not something that is obligated, and I don't have to listen to everything that they command me to do, and I don't need to stay away from everything that they prohibit me from doing. And he said this is باتفاق العلماء. He said all the scholars agree upon this. وقد حرم على الوالد الجهاد بغير إذنهما. He says in that it is not permissible for a child to go off to war without his parents' permission. لما يشق عليهما من توقيع قتله. So I thought this was, so this part of the discussion actually gets really interesting. He says, and the reason is that because it'll be difficult for them constantly thinking about whether he is alive or not. أو قطع عضو من أعضائه لشدة تفجيعهما على ذلك. So he says, or they fear that he will lose one of his limbs. And he said, so over here, what is the thing that is prevent this idea of the pain that it will cause the parents, right? The pain that it will cause the parents, and this is one of the reasons that he needs their permission before he is drafted for war. وقد ألحق بذلك كل صفر يخافان فيه على نفسه أو عضو من أعضائه. هذا كلام الشيخ أبو محمد. So he says, and similar to this, any type of travel or any type of journey he'll take, that this is a real possibility. This is a real possibility. So if I'm here and I ask my parents to go to, I say, hey, I'm going to DC, and they're like, no, you cannot go to DC because I'm worried about, huh? Are you talking about the peaceful protest? But anyway, so like,
very peaceful. The amount of safety, alhamdulillah.
So is that realistic? Okay, versus, okay, I'm going down the street. So how do you determine this, right? How do you determine this? You have to have a realistic outlook. A parent cannot absolutely forbid their children from going outside, right? They cannot absolutely forbid them from, going to places, as long as we can prove that place is safe. Does it mean that he will be safe? No, not necessarily. But that's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do the best that we can, and we take all the means possible in order to protect ourselves. So Ibn Salah, he says, al-uquq al-muharram kullu fi'l yata'adha bihi al-walid aw nahwuhu. So he says uquq means anything that will hurt a parent, right? Anything that will hurt a parent. Ta'adhiyan laysa bil-hayn, right? So anything that is like, I will hurt them, and it is something I could have overlooked, and something that was easy. مع كونه ليس من الأفعال الواجبة, knowing that even though what they're asking me for is not something that is an obligation. قال ربما قيل طاعة الوالدين واجبة في كل ما ليس بمعصية, that obeying them in everything that is not a sin. ومخالفة أمرهما في ذلك عقوق. And he's saying that if I disobey them, then this is considered عقوق. وقد أوجب كثير من العلماء طاعتهما في الشبهات. So he said, even those things that there is a doubt over, then you still have to obey them. قال وليس قول من قال من علمائنا يجوز له السفر في طلب العلم وفي التجارة بغير إذنهما مخالفا لما ذكرته فإن هذا كلام مطلق وفيما ذكرته بيان لتقيد ذلك المطلق والله أعلم. So over here he says that there's different situations, right? It's in general we should ask and we should obey our parents, but are there situations where I can disobey them? Yes, right? And that's what he's saying here. But it's important to understand that these specific situations, they are going to be dealt with on a case by case basis. And we'll stop here. We'll continue next week, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin. Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.